Everything you have been told about the Bermuda Triangle is either a myth, a misquote, or a story someone deliberately made more dramatic than it actually was. The sea monsters are gone. The alien abductions never had a single credible witness. And the time warps exist only in paperback novels sold at airport bookshops. But here is the uncomfortable part that most debunkers quietly skip over when they finish dismantling the legends and folklore. A small number of disappearances have no clean scientific explanation. And those cases are the ones that genuinely deserve your full and careful attention today. What we're left with after stripping away the noise is actually more unsettling than any invented story could ever hope to be. The real mystery isn't what people invented around this patch of ocean. It's what the ocean itself has quietly refused to explain. That gap between what's been debunked and what remains genuinely unsolved is exactly where this story begins to get interesting. Picture a triangle drawn across the western Atlantic, connecting three fixed points on the map. One corner sits at Miami, on the southeastern tip of the Florida coast. The second corner reaches out to Bermuda, a small island roughly 1,000 miles northeast of Miami. The third corner drops south to Puerto Rico, a full 1,500 miles from Bermuda. Inside those 3 points, you get roughly 500,000 square miles of open ocean. That's an area larger than the entire state of California. The water here runs from shallow turquoise reefs to some of the deepest trenches on Earth. The Gulf Stream cuts directly through this zone, pushing warm water north at surprising speed and force. Weather systems can build and collapse here faster than almost anywhere else in the Atlantic. Ships and planes crossing this stretch have always been navigating one of the busiest corridors in the world. So when things went missing here, people were paying close attention. Before 1964, the stretch of ocean between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico had no name at all. Sailors knew it as a busy shipping corridor, occasionally dangerous, occasionally deadly, like any open water. Then, a writer named Vincent Gaddis published a magazine article and changed everything about how people saw that patch of sea. He drew a rough triangle on a map, called it the Bermuda Triangle, and listed a string of disappearances inside its borders. The label did something that raw facts alone almost never do. It gave scattered events a shared identity. Suddenly, losses that had happened decades apart felt like chapters in a single, sinister story. Readers didn't just learn about missing ships and planes. They inherited a mythology that was already fully formed. The triangle wasn't discovered, it was invented, assembled from incidents that had no real connection to each other. And once a name exists, the mind starts hunting for evidence to fill it with meaning and weight. Long before anyone called it the Bermuda Triangle, sailors were already dying in these waters with troubling regularity. The Atlantic between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico has always been one of the most demanding stretches of ocean on Earth. Shallow reef systems, unpredictable weather, and powerful Gulf Stream currents have punished ships for centuries without needing any supernatural explanation. Spanish treasure fleets crossing from the New World in the 1500s lost dozens of vessels to sudden storms and hidden shoals. By the 1700s, maritime records from London and Havana were already thick with accounts of ships that simply never arrived. The wreck count in this region isn't a modern anomaly. It's the accumulated consequence of centuries of heavy traffic through genuinely hostile conditions. Hurricanes in this corridor can form and intensify faster than any vessel could reasonably escape, even with a full crew and fair warning. The seafloor beneath these waters holds thousands of wrecks, most of them explained, many of them forgotten. What the legend eventually did was take this long, ordinary history of loss and reframe it as something far more sinister. 5 Navy torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale on December 5, 1945, for a routine training run over the Atlantic. The flight was led by Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced pilot with hundreds of hours logged in the air. About 90 minutes in, Taylor radioed back that his compasses were behaving strangely and he couldn't identify the land below. The other pilots in the formation began reporting the same disorientation, and the radio exchanges grew tense and fragmented over time. Taylor believed he was flying over the Florida Keys when he was almost certainly somewhere over the Bahamas instead. He turned the formation northeast, then east, then northeast again, each correction pulling them further from shore. By late afternoon, the transmissions were breaking apart, and then they stopped completely in the dark. A rescue flying boat sent to search the area vanished that same night without sending a single distress call. 14 men were gone, and not one piece of wreckage from any of the 6 aircraft was ever officially recovered. Ships have their own version of this story, and some of them are far harder to dismiss. The USS Cyclops left Barbados in March 1918, carrying over 10,000 tons of manganese ore. She had 309 people aboard, and not one of them was ever seen or heard from again. No distress signal, no wreckage, no bodies. The ocean simply closed over her like she had never existed. She remained the single largest loss of life in U.S. Navy history outside of direct combat, and nobody has ever explained it. The cargo ship Marine Sulphur Queen vanished in 1963 with 39 crew members somewhere near the Florida Straits, leaving behind only a few life jackets and a name board. The Ellen Austin reportedly encountered a drifting vessel with no crew somewhere in these waters back in 1881. What makes these cases genuinely unsettling is not that they happened, but that the sea offered almost nothing back. No clear answer, no final word, just silence. Ships weren't the only things swallowed by this stretch of ocean. The sky above it has its own ledger of losses. The most famous entry is Flight 19, 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers that left Fort Lauderdale on December 5, 1945. Their mission was a routine training exercise, and every pilot on board was experienced enough to handle open water navigation without much trouble. Within 2 hours, the flight leader was reporting that his compasses were behaving strangely, and that the ocean below looked completely wrong to him. A rescue flying boat was dispatched to find them, and that aircraft vanished as well, taking 13 more men with it. No wreckage from any of those 6 planes has ever been recovered from the water below. In 1948, a British South American Airways Tudor 4 called Star Tiger disappeared somewhere between the Azores and Bermuda without sending a single distress call. The following year, another Tudor 4 named Star Ariel flew out of Bermuda toward Jamaica and simply ceased to exist on radar. Investigators found no mechanical fault, no weather event, and no explanation that fully satisfied anyone reviewing the evidence. Once the disappearances started stacking up, the explanations got stranger with every passing decade. Some writers pointed to Atlantis, the legendary sunken civilization supposedly resting on the ocean floor below. They claimed its crystal energy towers were still active, pulling ships and planes into the deep. Others went further and proposed that extraterrestrial craft were harvesting humans from the surface of the sea. A few theorists mapped underwater alien bases directly beneath the triangle's most active shipping and flight corridors. The sea monster tradition never really died either. Giant squid, prehistoric survivors, and unnamed creatures all got their moment. Each new theory borrowed credibility from the last, building a mythology that felt almost impossible to untangle from fact. Publishers found that the stranger the claim, the better the book sold, so the stories kept escalating. By the 1970s, the Bermuda Triangle had become less a place and more a cultural obsession. The legend had grown so large that almost nobody stopped to check the original records anymore. That gap between the story and the evidence is exactly where the truth starts to surface. Lloyd's of London has been insuring ships and aircraft for over 300 years, and they've seen everything. When underwriters analyzed the Bermuda Triangle, they found no reason to charge higher premiums for routes crossing through it. That single actuarial decision carries more weight than decades of sensational television documentaries ever could. Lloyd's doesn't deal in legend. They deal in loss ratios, claim histories, and cold statistical probability. The United States Coast Guard reviewed decades of incident reports and reached the same quiet, unglamorous conclusion. Disappearance rates inside the triangle match those of comparable ocean regions with similar traffic and similar weather patterns. The myth had convinced millions that this patch of water was uniquely deadly, but the numbers simply don't support that. What the data shows is a busy shipping lane with predictable, explainable hazards that any experienced mariner would recognize immediately. Sudden storms, shallow banks, and heavy commercial traffic create real danger, just not supernatural danger. And yet, a small cluster of cases refuses to dissolve into statistics, no matter how carefully you look. Beneath the surface of that blue water, the seafloor drops away in ways that feel almost deliberate. The continental shelf ends abruptly east of Florida, plunging into depths that exceed 5 miles in some places. The Puerto Rico Trench sits at the eastern edge, and it is the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Wreckage that sinks here doesn't settle onto a flat, searchable plain. It tumbles into darkness. Strong underwater currents move through those trenches constantly, carrying debris miles from where anything went down. Sand shifts, sediment buries, and the ocean simply closes over whatever falls into it. The Bahama banks add another layer of complexity, with shallow limestone shelves riddled with underwater caves and sudden drop-offs. A plane that hits the water intact can be swallowed by a trench before any rescue team even launches. This isn't supernatural concealment. It's geology doing exactly what geology does. The sea floor here is one of the most geographically varied and unforgiving stretches of ocean on the planet. Understanding that doesn't close the mystery, but it does explain why so little physical evidence ever surfaces. The Caribbean atmosphere doesn't build storms slowly. It detonates them in minutes with almost no warning. Warm surface water feeds energy upward into the air column, and convective cells can mature faster than radar can track. A clear sky at noon can become a wall of water and 60-knot wind by early afternoon in this region. Waterspouts are especially dangerous here, spinning columns of water that can reach hundreds of feet into the air without warning. A small aircraft or a light vessel encountering one has almost no time to react before the structure fails completely. The Gulf Stream adds another layer of chaos, pushing warm water against cooler Atlantic currents and generating localized squalls that don't appear on any forecast. Pilots flying visual-only routes in the 1940s and 1950s had no onboard weather radar to warn them of what was building ahead. A storm that looks passable from 5 miles out can close around a plane before the pilot can reverse course safely. These aren't fringe conditions. They're the baseline weather reality for every vessel and aircraft crossing this stretch of ocean. The triangle doesn't need a supernatural explanation when the atmosphere itself is already this hostile and this unpredictable. Beneath the seafloor of the Bermuda Triangle, there are pockets of frozen methane gas locked inside ice-like crystals. When those deposits destabilize, they release enormous columns of gas that rise violently through the water column toward the surface. The water above a methane eruption becomes saturated with bubbles, and its density drops dramatically within seconds. A ship sitting on that water suddenly has nothing solid beneath its hull to hold it up. It doesn't tip, it doesn't list. It simply drops straight down into the sea without any warning at all. No distress call, no debris field, no oil slick spreading across the surface afterward. Norwegian researchers actually demonstrated this effect in controlled tests, showing that a vessel could sink faster than any crew could react or respond. The Bermuda Triangle sits over the Blake Ridge, one of the densest known methane hydrate deposits on the entire Atlantic seafloor. That's not folklore, that's geology, and it raises a question that no one has fully answered yet. Some disappearances happened in calm weather, with no storm and no mechanical failure ever identified as the cause. The ocean can build a wall of water taller than a 6-story building in under 60 seconds. These aren't storm-driven swells that sailors can read and brace for on the horizon. Rogue waves form when smaller wave systems converge and their energy stacks into a single, catastrophic crest. Satellite data collected in the late 1990s confirmed that these waves are far more common than oceanographers had previously believed. A vessel caught beneath one doesn't list, doesn't flood slowly, and doesn't give its crew time to reach a radio. The hull compresses under a force measured in tons per square meter, and the ship simply ceases to exist as a structure. No distress signal gets sent because there is no window between impact and erasure. Wreckage disperses across hundreds of miles of open water, carried by currents that don't care about search grids. The Bermuda Triangle sits at a confluence of the Gulf Stream and Atlantic weather systems that are known to generate exactly these conditions. That doesn't close every case, but it does explain how a large vessel can vanish without leaving a single coherent clue. One of the oldest claims about the triangle is that compasses behave strangely there, spinning wildly or pointing somewhere they shouldn't. The truth is more grounded, but it's still worth understanding because it caused real problems for real navigators. Magnetic north and geographic north are not the same point, and the gap between them is called magnetic declination. That gap shifts depending on where you are on Earth, and it changes slowly over decades as the planet's core moves. In the early 20th century, parts of the triangle sat near a zone where declination was close to zero, meaning compasses pointed almost true north there. Pilots and sailors trained elsewhere would enter that zone and find their instruments reading differently than expected, which quietly introduced navigational errors. A small heading mistake compounds over distance, and over open ocean, a few degrees off means you miss your destination entirely. No supernatural force is needed to explain that, just a misread instrument and a lot of empty water. What's important is that this was a known, documented phenomenon, not a hidden curse or a secret of the deep. Navigators who understood declination corrected for it without incident, while those who didn't sometimes vanished into the map. Some researchers have pointed to a very unusual atmospheric feature spotted over the triangle in recent years. Satellite imagery revealed hexagonal cloud formations sitting directly above the western Atlantic near the Bahamas. These hexagons are not decorative. They're the visible signature of a phenomenon called microburst winds. A microburst is a column of air that slams downward from a cloud with extraordinary and sudden force. When that column hits the ocean surface, it spreads outward in every direction at once. Wind speeds inside a mature microburst can exceed 170 miles per hour at the surface. For a small aircraft flying low, that kind of force doesn't just shake the airframe, it can drive the plane straight into the water. Ships face a different but equally brutal problem, because the outward blast creates waves that arrive from multiple directions simultaneously. The hexagonal cloud hypothesis is compelling, but it hasn't been confirmed as the cause of any specific documented loss. What it does confirm is that the atmosphere above this region can behave in ways that defy ordinary prediction. Strip away the weather anomalies and the rogue waves, and a simpler explanation rises to the surface every time. This stretch of ocean is one of the busiest maritime and air corridors on the entire planet. More traffic means more chances for something to go wrong, and the math is brutally straightforward. Many of the pilots who flew into trouble here were inexperienced, flying light aircraft with minimal instruments on board. Navigational errors compound fast when you're over open water with no landmarks and shifting winds pushing you off course. The ocean doesn't forgive a wrong turn the way a road does. There's no shoulder, no guardrail, no second chance. Overconfidence played a documented role in several of the most famous cases investigators later reviewed in detail. Pilots and captains sometimes skipped weather checks, underestimated fuel loads, or simply trusted their instincts over their instruments. The triangle itself didn't claim those vessels. A series of small, avoidable human decisions did. And yet, even after you account for every confirmed case of error, a residue of genuinely unexplained incidents still remains. Strip away the myths, and most disappearances in the triangle find a perfectly ordinary explanation waiting for them. But a small cluster of cases resists every reasonable answer investigators have thrown at them so far. Flight 19 is the most famous. 5 Navy Avengers that vanished on a clear afternoon with experienced pilots at the controls. The search plane sent to find them disappeared too, and no wreckage from either group was ever conclusively recovered. The USS Cyclops carried over 300 men and simply ceased to exist in March of 1918, leaving no distress call and no debris field. The Mary Celeste drifted into port fully stocked with meals half eaten and not a single soul remaining anywhere aboard her. These cases have been studied for decades by serious investigators using modern forensic tools and satellite data. No collision, no rogue wave, no human error theory fully accounts for what the evidence actually shows us. That gap between what we can debunk and what we genuinely cannot explain is where the real discomfort lives. Even after the facts come in and the explanations land, something in us resists letting go of the mystery. We don't hold on to the Bermuda Triangle because we're gullible. We hold on to it because mystery does something real for the human mind. It opens a door in the ordinary world, a crack of light suggesting that not everything is mapped, measured, and fully understood. The triangle became a mirror, and what we saw in it was our own hunger for the unexplained, for something larger than routine. Psychologists call this apophenia, the tendency to find patterns and meaning in events that may have no real connection. We are wired for it, built by evolution to detect signal in noise, even when the noise is all there is. And so we stitched together lost ships, vanished planes, and strange radio silence into a single, coherent, terrifying story. The story felt true because we needed it to be true, not because the evidence demanded it. That need isn't weakness. It's the same instinct that drives every explorer who ever sailed toward an unmarked edge of the map. Somewhere inside the triangle, there's a body of water that plays by almost none of the normal rules. The Sargasso Sea is the only ocean region on Earth defined entirely by currents rather than any surrounding land. 4 powerful Atlantic currents form a slow, clockwise gyre, and the Sargasso sits trapped and spinning at the center. The water there is extraordinarily clear, almost unnervingly so, and warmer than the surrounding Atlantic by several degrees. A thick mat of golden sargassum seaweed covers the surface, sometimes stretching for hundreds of miles in every direction. Ancient sailors called it the Sea of Doom, convinced the weeds could grab a hull and hold a ship completely still forever. That fear wasn't entirely irrational. Becalmed sailing vessels did get stranded there for days, waiting desperately for wind. The Sargasso also produces a strange optical effect, where the calm surface makes distance nearly impossible to judge accurately. Pilots flying low over it have reported a disorienting flatness, a visual silence that strips away every normal sense of reliable depth. This is a place that genuinely disorients even experienced navigators, and it sits right at the triangle's heart. Beneath the surface of the Atlantic, one of the most powerful rivers on Earth runs through the triangle. It carries no banks, no bed of stone, just a torrent of warm water moving at 5 miles per hour. That speed doesn't sound dramatic until you realize it outpaces most search vessels trying to hold position. Anything dropped into the Gulf Stream gets carried northeast at a rate that covers 100 miles in a single day. A plane that sinks in the morning can be 40 miles from its last known position by nightfall and still moving. The search teams arrive at the coordinates, and the evidence is already somewhere else entirely. Wreckage that doesn't sink gets stretched across hundreds of miles of open ocean within just a few days. Debris fields that would normally cluster tightly around a crash site simply dissolve into the current. This is why so many triangle investigations end not with answers, but with empty water and unanswered questions. The Gulf Stream doesn't hide the truth. It moves it, relentlessly, far beyond the reach of any search grid. Sonar arrays now map the ocean floor with a resolution that would have seemed impossible just 30 years ago. Deep-sea robots have descended into the triangle's waters and returned with hours of detailed, high-definition footage. What they found was not a graveyard of lost ships or a field of scattered wreckage from vanished planes. The seafloor beneath the triangle is mostly unremarkable. Sediment, coral formations, and the ordinary geology of the Atlantic Basin. Satellites track every commercial vessel crossing that region in real time, logging position, speed, and heading without interruption. The Coast Guard now receives distress signals within minutes, and response times have dropped to levels that earlier generations could not have imagined. Disappearances in the triangle have actually fallen sharply since GPS and satellite monitoring became standard equipment on most vessels. Lloyd's of London, the world's most cautious insurance market, does not charge higher premiums for ships crossing the triangle. That single fact tells you more than any legend ever could. Yet a small cluster of older cases sits outside the reach of all this technology, stubbornly resistant to any clean explanation. Science has closed many of the triangle's famous cases, but a small cluster of disappearances still resists clean explanation. The 1945 loss of Flight 19 involved 5 experienced Navy pilots who all became disoriented within a single, relatively short flight window. No wreckage from those 5 Avenger aircraft has ever been confirmed recovered from the ocean floor. Methane seep events can destabilize water, but no recorded seep has been directly linked to any specific vessel loss in the region. Rogue waves are real, documented, and violent enough to sink large ships without leaving a recoverable debris field. But the timing and frequency of losses in this corridor still produces a statistical pattern that researchers genuinely disagree about interpreting. Magnetic anomalies in the area are real, though their practical effect on modern instruments remains a matter of active scientific debate. What honest researchers will tell you is that absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Some of these losses may simply be waiting for the right technology to finally reach the right depth. Every commercial flight crossing the triangle today carries a black box, a GPS transponder, and a satellite uplink reporting its position every few seconds. Pilots talk to controllers across the entire route, and any deviation from course triggers an immediate response from air traffic management. The ocean below is watched by weather satellites, Coast Guard radar, and military tracking systems running around the clock. Ships broadcast their location continuously through AIS transponders, leaving a digital trail that anyone with an internet connection can follow in real time. Since those systems became standard, the rate of genuinely unexplained disappearances in the triangle has dropped to nearly zero. Not because the ocean got calmer or the weather became more forgiving, but because nothing can vanish without leaving a record. That shift tells us something important about the older cases, the ones that built the legend before any of this technology existed. When a vessel disappeared in 1945, there was no transponder, no satellite, and no black box waiting to be found on the seafloor. Strip away the folklore, and the Bermuda Triangle becomes something far more interesting than a monster or a hoax. It's a stretch of open Atlantic where real ships and real planes have vanished without leaving behind a single satisfying answer. Some of those disappearances carry clean, documented explanations: human error, sudden storms, and the brutal physics of deep water. But a small, stubborn cluster of cases refuses to close neatly, and that refusal is worth sitting with honestly. The ocean in that region is genuinely hostile, with fast-moving currents that erase surface evidence faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Methane seeps, magnetic anomalies, and rogue wave science all offer partial answers, but none of them covers every case on the list. What the triangle actually represents is the collision between our hunger for pattern and the ocean's indifference to explanation. We built a legend because the alternative, genuine, unresolved uncertainty, felt harder to carry than a myth. The myth gave us a villain, and the science gave us probability, but neither gave us everything. What remains is a reminder that the world still holds edges where certainty runs out and honest questions begin.